My name is Sophia Miller, and the morning of the will reading I wore the only good dress I owned, not because I expected anything, because my grandfather had taught me that you show up properly for the people you love, even after they are gone, especially after they are gone. I ironed the dress the night before. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the iron and thinking about him, about the way he used to crouch beside me in the garden when I was 7, patient and unhurried, while I explained my experiments to him in the serious voice of a child who has discovered that the world has patterns worth understanding. He was the only adult who never interrupted me. The will reading was held in the family lawyer's office, a room that smelled of old paper and central heating, and the particular staleness of spaces where difficult things happen regularly. My father, Robert Miller, arrived in his best suit. My mother, Karen, wore pearls. My sister Olivia had been wearing a diamond bracelet since that morning, turning it on her wrist at breakfast with the absent proprietary pleasure of someone handling something already theirs. I sat across from them and folded my hands in my lap and waited. The lawyer, James Carter, arranged his papers without hurry. My father leaned back in his chair. He had the comfortable posture of a man who already knows the outcome of a meeting. James opened the folder. He read the distribution of assets in the steady, neutral voice of a person paid to deliver news without opinion. To my son Robert and his wife Karen, a sum to be distributed as outlined in Schedule A. My father nodded once, the controlled nod of a man confirming what he expected. To my granddaughter Olivia Miller, $11 million. Olivia's hand stilled on the bracelet. A small smile moved at the corner of her mouth. James looked up briefly, then back at the page. As for Sophia, my father's voice before James could finish the sentence, he slid a leather folder across the table toward my sister without looking at me. As for Sophia, he said, go earn your own. The room tilted, not dramatically, the way rooms tilt when something lands in the body before the mind has processed it, a physical response to a thing that has not yet become fully real. I heard my mother shift in her chair. I heard Olivia's bracelet clink softly against the table. I did not speak. I was preparing to, forming the words, when James Carter cleared his throat with the deliberate quietness of a man who has been waiting for this moment. There is something else, he said, from Henry Miller himself. He left instructions that this be read aloud and that Sophia be present when it is. My father's posture changed, a small thing, almost invisible. My mother's hand went to her pearls. Olivia stopped turning the bracelet. James lifted a sealed envelope from the bottom of the folder and held it for a moment with the care of someone handling something that matters. He broke the seal. He began to read. My mother's face drained of color before he reached the second paragraph, and then she screamed. The sound was not grief. It was something older and more frightened than grief. I drove to the ranch house because I did not know where else to go. The road there took 40 minutes through flat Texas land that my grandfather had loved in the particular way of people who grow up with space and come to need it. He had told me once that cities made him feel like he was thinking in a smaller font, that the plains were where his thoughts had room to be their actual size. I had not been back in over a year, not by choice. The story I had been told was that my grandparents had been moved to a care facility in Cedar Ridge, that visitors were restricted, that it was difficult for them, the disruption of guests, the confusion. My father had told me this carefully, with the practiced concern of someone who has rehearsed an explanation until it sounds like love. I had believed him. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged in the middle. The wind chimes moved in the dry wind, the same ones I had measured as a child, timing their oscillations, writing the results in a notebook my grandfather had bought me specifically for the purpose because, he said, if an observation is worth making, it is worth recording. The front door opened before I reached the steps. My grandmother, Margaret Miller, stood in the doorway. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "So you finally decided to show up." The words hit me like cold water. I said, "Grandma, I was told you were in Cedar Ridge. I was told visitors weren't allowed." Her expression shifted. Barely, but I had been reading faces my whole life in the specific way of people who learned early that faces carry more information than words. She said, "Come inside." She showed me the notepad 20 minutes later, my grandfather's handwriting, familiar as my own name, lists of dates, times, a phone number written and rewritten in the margin, the repetition of someone trying to memorize something important. The number was not mine, not even close. I had carried the same phone since high school. I had never changed the number. I had given it to everyone I loved, written it on every form, answered it every time it rang from a number I recognized, and many times when I did not. My grandfather had been calling a number that was not mine, for months, while he was dying. I said, "Where did he get this number?" Margaret said, "Robert told him you'd changed it when you went to college. He said you didn't want to be disturbed, that you were building a new life and the past felt heavy to you." I sat down without meaning to. The chair caught me. I said, "I came here last spring break. I drove 4 hours. I stood on that porch and Olivia was there, and she told me no one was home. She stood me in the eye and said the house was empty and you had both been moved, and she didn't know exactly where." Margaret's hand went to her mouth. She said, "We were here. We have always been here." I said, "She stood right there and she told me to go home." The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind chimes. Margaret said, "They told us you didn't want to be found, that you had said the family felt like a weight you needed to put down, that you were ashamed of where you came from." I thought about every science fair my grandfather had attended, the way he clapped, not the polite clap of obligation, but the real kind, loud and slightly embarrassing and completely genuine. The way he had kept every ribbon I ever won in a shoebox on the top shelf of his study, organized by year, labeled in his handwriting. I said, "He thought I abandoned him." She said, very quietly, "He called for you, at the end. He kept asking for his little scientist." I did not cry immediately. I sat with what she had said for a long moment, letting it move through me the way cold moves through a room when a window opens, finding every corner. Then I did cry, and I did not try to stop it, because some things are not meant to be managed. Margaret sat beside me and put her hand over mine, and did not say anything, which was the precisely correct response. After a while, she stood. She walked to the rotary phone on the kitchen wall. Her fingers moved through the dial with the deliberate steadiness of someone who has made a decision they intend to keep. I said, "Who are you calling?" She said, "All of them. Robert, Karen, Olivia. They're coming here tonight." I said, "Grandma." She said, "James Carter will be here too. Your grandfather left instructions. There are things that need to be said in front of everyone." She said it the way my grandfather used to say things when they were already decided, and the discussion was therefore about details rather than direction. I said, "All right." She said, "Good. Wait in the kitchen." I sat at the kitchen table where my grandfather used to drink his morning coffee while I showed him clippings I had cut from science magazines. He had a specific way of reading them, leaning forward, brow slightly furrowed, the expression of genuine engagement rather than performed interest. He asked questions that revealed he had actually read what I had given him rather than glanced at it and nodded. No one else in my life had ever done that. I heard them arrive one by one. My mother's voice first, warmly social in the way of someone whose warmth is a skill rather than a feeling. "Oh, how lovely to be here! How wonderful!" My father's measured pleasantness. "Good to see you, it's been too long." Olivia last, theatrical in her boredom. A loud exhale, a chair scraped back. Then James Carter's voice, professionally warm. Then silence. Margaret's voice cutting through it. "Everyone sit down, there are things to be addressed." I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my hands and thought about my grandfather's voice. The specific quality of it, low and unhurried, the voice of a man who had decided long ago that he had enough time to say what he meant properly. My name in his voice, my little scientist. Margaret called me in. I walked through the doorway and into the living room, and the room went completely still. My father's face did something complicated. His color changed first, a slight draining, then a recovery. the practiced composure of a man who has trained his face not to tell the truth without permission. He said, "Sophia, what are you doing here?" My mother's smile didn't fully form. Olivia's lips parted. She said, "You weren't supposed to be here." She said it before she could stop herself. She understood immediately that she had said it. I watched her understand. Her expression closed over it quickly, but not quickly enough. I said nothing. I sat where Margaret directed me to sit. James Carter adjusted his glasses and opened the second folder, the one underneath the first, the one that had been waiting. The room during the reading was a room full of people hearing different things. My grandmother heard confirmation of what she had suspected. My father heard the specific sound of a plan failing. My mother heard the future rearranging itself in ways she had not prepared for. Olivia heard the word lab, and what followed the word lab, and something moved across her face that she did not entirely control. I heard my grandfather's voice in James Carter's voice, because James read the letter the way he had presumably been instructed to read it, with care, without performance, in the manner of someone delivering something that was meant to be heard rather than presented. To my dearest Sophia. James's voice was steady. The paper was old, the kind of yellow that comes from years of being kept somewhere important. If this letter is being read, then I am gone from this world. But I hope these words remind you that you were never invisible to me. My throat closed. I pressed my hands flat on my thighs. You were always different, not in a way that needed fixing, in a way that made life richer. While others chased noise, you searched for truth. While they performed, you observed. You were my little scientist, my pride, my legacy. My mother shifted in her seat. Her arms crossed over her chest. My father's jaw flexed once. I remembered being 7, sitting on the porch with a glass jar, timing how long it took rainwater to fill it to various levels, recording the results in careful columns. My grandfather had come out with 2 glasses of lemonade and crouched beside me, and asked, in genuine curiosity, what I was measuring and why. I had explained for 11 minutes without stopping. He had listened to every word. I watched you grow up with questions no one else wanted to answer. I saw how your joy dimmed every time your mother brushed you off, every time your father changed the subject. I saw how they poured their attention into Olivia while you built your own path in silence. My grandmother's hand found mine. I gripped it. I don't blame your sister entirely. She played the part they gave her. But you, Sophia, you wrote your own script. That courage made me proud beyond words. I remembered the regional science fair, the trophy I carried home not knowing whether to be proud or ashamed, the house empty because my parents were at Olivia's rehearsal, my grandfather appearing at my door 2 hours later without explanation, as if he had simply known, looking at the trophy on my bed and saying in his quiet, certain way, "This is significant work. I need you to tell me everything about the methodology." I had asked him if we could put the trophy under my bed so my parents wouldn't look at me differently. He had nodded, his eyes going heavy with something he didn't say. He had lifted the trophy and carried it carefully to the closet himself, treating it with a reverence that told me he understood exactly why I was asking and found it heartbreaking. You deserved recognition, warmth, a space to be exactly who you are. I cannot rewrite the past, but I can build your future. That is why I left you the lab, because you are not a mistake. You are the miracle this family never understood. James folded the letter. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had just become impossible to pretend had not been said. Olivia broke first. She stood so fast her chair scraped back and struck the wall behind her. She said, "This is ridiculous." She said, "Why should she get anything?" She said, "I was the one visiting him. I was the one smiling, listening, sitting with him. I played the perfect granddaughter." She said it in the full room, in front of James Carter, in front of Margaret, in front of me, and in saying it she gave back everything she had claimed. the perfect granddaughter, I said. I did not say it loudly. I said it the way my grandfather used to say things he wanted to be heard clearly. I said, "You mean the performance. You sat with a dying man and performed love so that you could stand in this room when he was gone and collect the reward? You visited him and held his hand and smiled, and it meant nothing. It was audition, not love." She said, "Shut up, you don't know anything." I said, "I know you stood on that porch and looked me in the face and told me no one was home. I know he spent his last months believing I had abandoned him because you stood right there and you lied. I know he called a wrong number over and over looking for me and never understood why I didn't answer." The room was very quiet. Olivia's mouth opened. Something moved across her face that I had not seen there before. Not rage, something underneath rage, smaller and harder to look at. She said, "You're lying," but she said it quietly. My mother said, "Enough, Sophia, stop this. You don't understand the pressure she's been under. You don't understand what sacrifices have been made." I looked at my mother. I said, "Sacrifices." I said it simply, without heat, because heat was not what the moment required. I said, "The sacrifices were made by a man who spent decades believing his granddaughter had chosen to disappear from his life. That was the sacrifice. He paid it. He paid it alone. And he still found a way to leave me the thing that mattered most to him." My father stood. He used the boardroom posture, the one designed to suggest that reasonable men are speaking and everyone else should listen. He said, "Sophia, let's be realistic. Everything you had, the education, the science camps, the competitions, we supported all of that." I said, "No." He said, "Sophia." I said, "No, I saw the checks, every camp, every entry fee, every piece of equipment. I went looking after you told me his care facility didn't accept visitors. I found the receipts and the correspondence Margaret had saved. It was Grandpa and Grandma. It was always them." My father's composure fractured along a line I had not seen in it before. He said, "We gave you a home. We gave you a family." I said, "You gave me a place to live and a lesson in what it feels like to be tolerated. Those are different things." My mother said, "Family means sacrifice. If you want to honor your grandfather's memory, you'll think about what that means. You'll think about Olivia." I said, "I will honor his memory by doing exactly what he built the lab for. I will not sign over anything. I will not renegotiate. This is not a transaction. This was never a transaction. That is the entire point of the letter you just sat through." Olivia made a sound that was attempting to be a laugh. She said, "You've always thought you were better than us. You've always looked at us like we were beneath you." I looked at my sister. I thought about what the letter had said. She played the part they gave her. I said, "I don't think I'm better than you. I think you were handed a role and you played it because it was easier than resisting it. I think you're in that role right now. And I think somewhere underneath all of this, you know that." She did not reply. My grandmother stood. She did not move quickly. She was not a woman who moved quickly, but she rose from her chair with the deliberate authority of someone who has decided this is the moment and has been patient about arriving at it. She said, "How dare you?" The room went still in a different way. She said, "How dare you stand in this house and speak of sacrifice? This house that Henry built, this house where he died asking for a girl you told him had forgotten him." My father said, "Mother, please." She said, "Do not call me that." She said, "You lied to your father. You lied to him while he was dying. You manufactured a story and fed it to him in his last weeks so that the girl he loved most would not be there to hear what he actually thought of all of you. And you," she turned to Olivia, "you stood on that porch and sent her away. You looked her in the face and you sent her away." Olivia said nothing. Margaret said, "You will leave this house." My father attempted the reasonable voice one more time. He said, "This is absurd. We can contest." James Carter's voice, calm and final. "The will is irrevocable. The documentation is comprehensive. Henry anticipated a contest and structured accordingly. You would be welcome to pursue it at considerable cost and with no realistic prospect of success." Silence. My father looked at me. I looked back. He said, "This isn't over." I said, "Yes, it is." He turned and walked to the door. My mother followed without speaking, which was its own kind of answer. Olivia went last. She stopped in the doorway for a moment. She did not turn around. She stood there for perhaps 3 seconds, and then she went through the door and it closed behind her. The engine started, the tires moved on gravel, and then there was the other kind of silence, the kind that comes after something has finally finished, rather than been interrupted. Margaret put her arms around me. I held on. We stayed like that for a long time in the quiet house, while the wind chime said whatever they had been trying to say all afternoon. 6 years is long enough for the shape of your life to become unrecognizable to the person you were before it. The Henry Miller Innovation Center occupied 5 buildings on the edge of the Texas landscape my grandfather had loved, glass and steel that caught the morning light in ways he would have examined carefully, tilting his head, making some quiet observation about refraction that I would have written down. I walked through the lobby every morning past his portrait, a photograph taken in the sunflower field he had planted on the property's south edge, smiling in the unself-conscious way of someone who does not think about how they look when they are happy. The plaque beneath it read, "For the dreamers who invest in those the world overlooks." I had written that. I had written it thinking about a 7-year-old with a glass jar on a porch. 27 scientists worked in the buildings. Tara Johnson, who had been my closest friend in university, led the drought-resistant crops division with the particular intensity of someone for whom the work is indistinguishable from the purpose. Michael Lee ran irrigation systems research and still burned popcorn in the break room and acted surprised every time, which had become something of an institution. We had solved problems I could not have articulated when I started. Small solutions to large problems, the kind that do not make headlines but change the daily texture of lives in ways that accumulate into something significant. The Little Scientist initiative began in the 3rd year, 15 children that first summer, rural kids with the specific combination of curiosity and isolation I recognized from the inside, children who had questions and no one around them to confirm that the questions were worth asking. A 13-year-old girl with thick glasses handed me a notebook at the end of the 2nd week. She held it out without speaking, watching my face with the guarded expression of someone who has learned to anticipate dismissal. Inside were observations about local bee populations, column after column of hand-recorded data, the calculations uneven but the methodology sound, the instinct underneath the execution genuinely good. I looked up from the notebook. She was still watching my face. I said, "This is serious work. Where did you learn to structure an observation like this?" She said, I just watched them and wrote it down." I said, "That is exactly what science is." She said, very quietly, "You actually read it." I had to turn away. I pressed my mouth for a moment, then I turned back and told her that I wanted to sit with her the next morning and go through the methodology together, and I watched something shift in her face that I recognized completely. The specific recalibration of someone who has been told they are worth paying attention to and does not yet know what to do with it. I knew what to do with it. I had been learning for 6 years. Olivia came back on a Tuesday in the 2nd summer of the program. I saw her through the lobby glass before she came in, standing outside for a moment looking at the building with an expression I could not read from that distance. She came inside without the diamond bracelet. Her hair was pulled back simply. The particular armor of the person I had grown up across from was gone, and without it she looked younger and less certain, and somehow more like someone I might have known if things had been different. She stood in front of my grandfather's portrait for a long time. She said, without turning around, "I don't expect forgiveness." I said, "Okay." She said, "I just wanted to see what he built for you, what you built with it." I stood beside her and looked at his face in the photograph. I thought about what his letter had said. She played the part they gave her. I thought about how long she had been playing it and what it must have cost, year after year, to maintain the performance. The particular exhaustion of being the golden one. The specific loneliness of being loved for a role rather than a self. I said, "Come on, I'll show you around." I gave her the tour. She walked through the labs with an attention that surprised me, asking questions I had not expected her to have, pausing in the community garden where local families worked the plots we had established for them. She stopped at the garden for a long time. She said, "He always knew who you were, even when I pretended he didn't." We did not hug. We did not cry together. The damage between us was real, and it had been doing what damage does for 6 years, settling into the structure of things, and a single afternoon could not undo that. But she came back. Twice a year she came back, and she taught the little scientist children how to present their work, how to stand in front of a room and say what they meant clearly and without apology, skills she had built in the long years of performing a version of herself designed for other people's approval. She put them to different use now. It was not reconciliation in the clean, resolved sense of the word. It was something more honest than that. Two people with a complicated history finding the small ways they could be useful to each other without pretending the history was not there. My parents moved to Florida. My father retired earlier than he had planned. My mother appeared occasionally in the social columns of publications aimed at people for whom appearance is the primary enterprise. Their names did not appear in my inbox or at my door. I did not miss them in the sharp way that I once thought I would, the way you anticipate a missing tooth with your tongue. I missed something around them, the idea of a family that had turned out to be different from the actual family, and I had learned to let that be what it was rather than what I wished it were. Margaret lived in the small apartment attached to my home. Every morning I brought her coffee and she told me things about my grandfather I had not known, small things. The way he sang under his breath when he thought no one could hear him, the specific expression he made when he found something genuinely funny, the habit he had of rereading letters multiple times before sending them because he believed words sent could not be unsent and therefore deserved to be exactly right. She was teaching me who he was in the years before I knew him. It was a gift I had not known to ask for. It was late autumn when she called me into her room. She was 87. Her body had slowed in the particular way of things that have been running a long time and are conserving what remains for what matters. But her eyes were the same eyes they had always been, sharp and present, the eyes of a woman who has decided what she believes and settled into it. She said, "Sophia." She said it softly, which was unusual. She reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a small velvet pouch. She said, "This belongs to you." Inside was a pocket watch, silver, worn smooth by decades of daily handling, the surface carrying the particular warmth of an object that has lived close to a person's body for a long time. The initials HM were engraved on the back, faint now, the letters softened by years of thumbs moving across them. I opened it. Inside the lid, a photograph no larger than a playing card, me at my first science fair. 7 years old, beaming at the camera, standing beside the display board that had taken me 3 weeks to make. The experiment had been about honeybee communication, which I had chosen because I had read something about it in a magazine and had not been able to stop thinking about it. My grandfather's handwriting curved along the photograph's border in the small, precise script I knew better than my own. "My little scientist will change the world someday." I sat down on the edge of the bed. The tears came without warning, the way they sometimes do when something arrives that the body has been waiting longer than the mind knew. I said, "He carried this." Margaret said, "Every day." I said, "Every day?" She said, "Every single day." I held the watch against my chest. The years moved through me. The dress ironed the night before, the tilting room, the wrong phone number in his handwriting, the porch where Olivia had stood and sent me away, the silence of a house where someone had died calling a number that was not mine. And underneath all of it, steady as the wind chimes, the thing that had not changed. He had known who I was. Through every lie told about me, through every visit blocked, through every manufactured silence, he had carried the photograph of a 7-year-old at a science fair and written on the border that she would change the world, and kept it against his body every day until he died. He had never stopped knowing. That night, I walked out to the old bench behind the ranch house. The field stretched dark and enormous under a sky that my grandfather used to say thought in a larger font than any city. I held the pocket watch up and the moonlight caught its surface, and for a moment it glowed. I said, "You were right." I said, "They tried to make me smaller, and I grew anyway. And I will spend whatever time I have making sure no child who deserves to be seen goes unseen." The wind moved through the field. The grass said whatever grass says when the wind finds it at night. I sat for a long time in the dark with my grandfather's watch in my hand and the stars doing what they do regardless of what happens beneath them. And I felt for the first time in a way that went all the way to the bottom of me, complete. Not because of the inheritance, not because of the lab or the scientists or the girl with the B notebook or any of the particular victories that had accumulated in 6 years of building something worth building. Because of the watch. Because of 7 words written in a small hand on the border of a photograph. He had known. He had always known. And knowing that, finally, without doubt, I understood that nothing they had done had actually touched the thing that mattered most. They had tried to rewrite me, but he had already written me down. In his own hand, kept against his heart, every single day. I closed the watch gently. I put it in my pocket. I walked back across the dark field toward the lights of the house. Tomorrow the children would come with their notebooks. Tomorrow there was work to do. Tonight there was this. His faith, carried in silver, warm from being held. Mine now.